Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Chucky, episode 4. This episode should have just been called, Jake, why are you killing? Jake, why are you a murderer? Even though he basically was not even in the environment where murder was to have happened, it's still like, hey, Jake, why are you a murderer? Like, it's obviously there's some kind of weird connection if it's not Jake actually being in the home of which, or place of which, murdering is occurring. All of a sudden, the connection of murderer to Jake is to be if either this doll is to be involved, which technically was his, or previously was his, or it is to be like Jake himself for whatever reason. Because if anything, the last episode I completely forgot to mention when Detective Evans was to go to Devon. So this guy's seriously name is Devon Evans. Man, that's got to be some crucial just making jokes of. Like, hey, Devon Evans. Just the name alone just seems like either something lazy happened there or whatever. But like Devon Evans, I don't know. But I'm sure people would make fun of his name constantly. But anyways, it is what it is. So Devon was to have been told by his mother to leave Jake alone, to not like be around Jake, because Jake is either a bad influence or there's something wrong with him. And of course, like within this episode, Devon completely just is like, whatever his mother is to say, whatever, because Devon knows better. He knows Jake. It feels like there's something about him when Devon is to look at Jake is just to be like, you're not going to go and murder and kill me. Bashal. So Jake, why are you murdering? So the real important part about this episode is that Jake and Lexi are putting their differences aside to do something in this episode together, weirdly. Because, if anything, there are some really good things that come out of this episode, but there's also some points where you start to see that Logan may have some shades of Lucas in him. Again, everybody, go ahead and check out the movie Black Friday with Bruce Campbell and Evan Sawa. Looks really interesting. Check out the trailer. It looks pretty cool. Go ahead and check out that movie. It's coming out this month because it would probably be coming out around Black Friday. And it's kind of weird to have eventually technically see a retail movie, but the end goal of it is to possibly see a really cool and interesting horror film that kind of takes like Black Friday and goes a horror element to it, because you don't see that often. But anyways, I really wish that they would have gone into a really dark part of it, where it's just like retail, but it like really gets dark, and like eventually there's something wrong with the people working at retail, and like you have this new hire and they're like, oh no, like, all the retail workers just lose their freaking mind and kill people. That would be interesting because of the stress of the holiday. That would actually make sense for a film. Somebody pop out that idea to the world and do that kind of movie, because that would be interesting, like a Crazies kind of thing. Maybe they end up getting some new Black Friday product in and it turns them all crazy. Let's do that film. I'll write the story maybe, or I'll just come up with a concept and someone can make me $1 million. That'd be okay. So, but pushing on, back to the episode. So in this episode, we have Chucky, who is to be getting a makeover, let's just say. Hence why I couldn't rationalize going and putting a thumbnail of what Chucky looks like in this episode, because I wanted to avoid eventually giving out spoilers to eventually how Chucky looks in this episode. So whether he was to look perfectly fine or whether he was to look otherwise, like I wanted to kind of leave it a mystery. So eventually someone could go in and not feel spoiled about how Chucky is to look in this episode. So really, the very last scene in this episode is actually really funny. It's really a hilarious send off, and I really did enjoy it. But yeah, so it's also kind of interesting to kind of see Chucky like out of his like out of kind of the normal like houses and whatever environment. Like it was kind of interesting to see him eventually being put into this hospital. I was like, man, what could they have actually have done with them having to like be able to kind of play around a little bit with this environment. I'm gonna pause here for a second, or let me charge up my tablet for a second here because I'm worried it's gonna die while I'm talking. So yeah, so I think that's all that I wanted to say. Cryptic sense for this one. Let's go into spoilers. Let's go and try to get this out as quickly as possible. Devin eventually from the last episode being told by his mother not to eventually hang out with Jake. Bashal all that because he's going to hang out with him anyways. Plus, it seems that Devin is to finally get some Googled information about what the heck is to be with the whole Chucky thing, because maybe he didn't catch the entire franchise of this movie via any app that you can conveniently go and find. Maybe on a sci-fi app somewhere or possibly anywhere else that would easily be able to have you be able to watch Chucky anywhere, seemingly, at some point. So, with that said, let's go into that double 5 time territory. Let's leave some things a mystery. So let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about that time I'm going to spoil this episode, because I also want to kind of quickly get this done, because I feel like people like short reviews, especially of this, even though I like to take my long-winded ASS time. So let's get into it. So the aftermath. So it seems we had a lot of people that immediately had the whole problem of like, hey, how is it that they couldn't have noticed that like this house was caught on fire? And how is it that it seemed like everybody was just dancing around and like they were oblivious of the whole house going into blaze? Well, you would have thought that a lot of cats, like a lot of people, would have got burnt, but they didn't. A lot of them just got a lot of smoke in their lungs, and so now they're evidently gonna just be like, yeah, man, I'm never gonna smoke again if I ever was going to. So, supposedly now it's the aftermath of kind of figuring out what condition everyone's in. Supposedly, Caroline is to be hospitalized. She's supposedly in stable condition, good, because heaven forbid we would have wanted this little girl to eventually got any kind of carnage out of this whole ordeal. So, Lexi seems to be completely fine. It seems like she didn't really need any like medical attention or whatever. She didn't get any burns on her body. Neither did seemingly anybody else. Junior was to have gotten to a point where it seems like he can't run cross country for a month because his lungs had been so filled with smoke that he evidently cannot do any kind of after school activities, I guess. And so Logan is just very disappointed about that, because Logan, of course, was to kind of push Junior to go cross country and like every little minute thing to just tell this kid like, hey man, like watch your calorie intake, watch everything that you're doing so that way you can be at your best for cross country. So we end up eventually having eventually in this episode, I'm going to go in a roundabout way talk about this episode. I'm not going to go in perfect order of the episode because I feel like there is some things to kind of to be more importantly focused on than others. So we end up having the mayor and Nathan Cross eventually kind of going through and kind of making their rounds. And so uh, eventually the Wheelers are to eventually bump into the Crosses. And so eventually Lucas is to blame the mayor for them having horrible parenting skills and for the fact that they let Lexi just run wild, and like this is uh the legitimate time where this kind of blew up in their face, literally. So well technically like it burnt their house down, so I guess like that's still metaphorically, well, either way. But yeah, uh so eventually we have Nathan Cross, who's to tell Lucas, it's like, well, if you weren't so focused in having your son um, do this cross country thing and pushing him so hard, just so that way you can relive your childhood through your son. And then eventually both Lucas and Nathan are kind of having this punching out fight. And so Detective Evans is to kind of hear this whole discussion, and so she separates because it's a female detective. She ends up separating these two and is like, hey, like Oliver Nathan is dead, just so you all know, because I have to go and gab to everybody. Because Detective Evans goes and tells her son, like, hey, just so you know, Oliver's dead. Like, I'm just like, we have this Detective Evans that is to just like tell people everything, and I get it because since she's technically the police officer in here, and they have to give her something to do so they can kind of make her feel like that people are going to eventually like we it's a thing that we have to get used to because there has to be a detective in this case who is to have to do something and come up with some kind of uh like thing of investigation. So like we have to have this girl have something to do. So like this is what we're eventually more and more making this person important in the story, because like even though she probably shouldn't have released this information, because like did this woman even go to Oliver's parents to just say like, hey, don't tell anybody about my child's horrible death or anything like that? No, this girl is just loosely just giving this information out. Yeah, this kid was murdered. He was stabbed multiple times. Like just nobody in the whole entire town just go into a mad panic because the mayor knows that somebody was stabbed in this town. And so maybe that should cause like a mass panic to have like, hey guys, murderers on the loose. But whatever in my own mind of things. So Lucas goes off to Junior, and supposedly Junior is to get a camera shoved down his throat. So I guess they can kind of check on Junior's kind of lungs and kind of see how things are going. And so Lucas is to eventually ask Junior, like, well, hey, like, I never really pushed you all that hard to eventually do cross country, right? It's something that you really want to do, right? And Junior is to just not really say anything, and Lucas is like, well, I want to hear it. Give me a little holler. Like, let me know in the comments below that you are to have actually liked cross country or not. And so Junior is like, no, I really do love it. It's like, you can obviously tell that this kid was probably forced to do this, but he doesn't want to tell his father that because who knows? Maybe we're going to find out that Lucas has a way more darker side that we don't even know about. And I think they're kind of planting that seed here to eventually see where Lucas is eventually going to head into the later episodes. Because if Logan, or if did I say Lucas there? I said Logan. If Lucas was a man that was to have been like really hard on his kid, now that Lucas is gone, now we probably have to have some kind of replacement character for that, possibly. And I guess that now has to be Logan to just kind of be like in a different way, somewhat similar to his brother than we were to really think about. And maybe that's the seed is being planted here. So pushing on. So we have Lexi like talking to her parents, and here's the big, like, really cool part where Lexi is talking to her parents and basically getting the book thrown at her, where they're like, "Hey, you had this party without our consent, and then you torched our house, our like historical monument house, because you just had to have a party, and now all these kids are hurt and injured, and one of them is to be dead." And Lexi is to just immediately just be like, "Well, Jake," and like, here's the point where like I was just like, "Ah," because the mayor immediately goes like, "You're blaming all this on Jake, and Jake wasn't even at your party." And I'm like, bang, right there. Why is it that Detective Evans was to immediately grab Jake and just be like, "Well, hey, I need to ask you a couple questions about this whole party that you weren't even involved in. And because technically your doll was involved in this party. So it's either you or this doll. And so what's up with either you or this doll, Jake? Let me know, Jake." Let me know. Are you just crazy? Do you have these mind powers that is to eventually control this doll to kill? What is up, Jake? What is up with that? Because if there was to have been previously death, like, around Jake, now we have to go into a radius-like thing. If there is to be death that ends up happening in the radius of Jake's neighborhood, weirdly Jake has to somehow be involved. Like, why are you murdering Jake? Why? Tell me. And so Jake is not telling the detective anything, and so, like, really there's not much to say there. So, so basically Jake is to eventually be checking on like Devin, and just kind of checking up on things, because like he heard about all this stuff, and I'm sure the Lucas family, or Lucas, why do I keep saying Lucas? Logan, Bree, and Jake probably all went to this hospital to kind of check on everybody, because Jake technically has certain classmates or certain people that are his friends that went to this party. So Lexi confronts Jake and is to say that Chucky did this. Chucky burned down the party, and Jake is like, "Well, I know. Like, I knew he was probably going to do something like that." And so immediately Lexi is just like, "Well, like, you're a freak. You're a weirdo. You're..." Like, she's like not blaming Chucky whatsoever, because Chucky is seemingly the one killing or whatever. No, Lexi deflects everything of what Chucky is to do, and is just basically say that Jake is the problem here. And like, I thought that, like, and Lexi was just like, "And you purposely took this doll, gave it to me, knowing full well that Chucky was going to kill. Like, what kind of a freak does that?" Or like, what kind of a demented person, like, crazy person. And like, I'm just like, wait a minute. I'm like, if Jake was to realize how disturbed this doll was, wouldn't he immediately just kind of huck it off on somebody? And it seems Lexi doesn't even realize how horrible of a person that she is to be to Jake, as if she has never done anything wrong. And when Jake is to confront her about the things that she has done wrong, Lexi is just to be like, "Well, no, like, everything that I did was like is off the table now. It's already been done." Like, but you now. Like, it's just like, what the heck? So like, all of a sudden we just have a whiteout of everything that Lexi has done, and that it's just like it's back to 0-0, and now Jake having this doll that should have still been 0-0, what is just to be like we're basically chalkboarding out the whole scoreboard just to say, well, now the point is to be on Jake's side, because now Jake was to have sent this doll, because Jake was to say that he knew during the talent show that Chucky was to have been able to have this ability. Like, Jake could really go and tell Lexi at this point, like, that he didn't exactly know anything. Like, he could play to the fact that, like, he really could have just said, like, well, I don't know anything. I don't know. Like, your sister wanted this doll. I gave it to you. I didn't know that he was an axe murderer. Like, I didn't know that he was going to hack and slash through people. Like, it's just a coincidence. But no, we don't go into that play at all. So, like, we just have Jake just admittedly just saying that, like, oh yeah, I knew Chucky was a murderer and I sent him off to your house because I didn't really think about it. So now Lexi, when she tries to go and talk to her parents, that leads her nowhere. And so now Lexi has to go and team up with Jake, because she's just like, well, like, now I don't want to I don't want to be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life and be worried that I'm going to have a doll come at me at some point in time. So we're going to have to resolve this. And Jake is like, well, I can understand that. Like, let's go on and let's go to your house to maybe think that maybe Chucky is still at that house. So they're like, good plan. Because we also had a moment where Jake was talking to Devin, and like, they were kind of like mentioning, because like Devin was like, hey man, like, any of the things that were to happen at this party, like, none of it's on you, even though it seems like we're kind of curving it that way, because Devin is to be like, I know you, Jake. It seems like you're not going to be a person that is going to hurt anybody. Or maybe you might have a motive at some point, but then you decided to change from the dark side, or so we are to believe. So now that I can put a pen in things, there's also this flashback-like story. So when Devin is to go and research the Chucky doll and find out everything about it, we cue up this flashback scene of a seemingly, of course, younger Charles, not as young as he was in previous episodes, reading Peter Pan to all these kids, and he is kind of curving the story in a different manner. To where all of a sudden the old woman is like, wow, like, you're really good at kind of keeping these kids kind of busy, so good for you. And so all of a sudden young Charles is to eventually go through this orphanage, and there's to be this janitor that is to kind of smack Charles with his shoes, because, hey man, you let dirt in. So all of a sudden Charles is going and taking all the kids to just be like, well, hey, let's all go on a fun mission together. Let's go and let's play Peter Pan. And like, yeah, let's go and do that. So Charles takes them out to this forest to eventually find this dead body, which of course is to be the janitor. And all of a sudden there's to be these maggots that are kind of gnawing on him. And so all of a sudden a lot of the kids run away, but there's one kid who ends up kind of poking at this body. And so Charles is like, hey, like, yeah, this kid doesn't have a problem. He's got guts. So really showcasing that Charles was the one to kill this kid. So I'm like, so what is going to have developed with this other kid? I'm kind of curious. Like, was it that they're going to eventually do something with this? Or is it just going to be a, like, just another flashback that doesn't really lead anywhere? Kind of curious. So maybe Chucky is to eventually go back to this other kid, and that's the connection. and that's how Chucky is to eventually go and get a different Chucky doll. Maybe they're going to switch him over, because I can't see Chucky for the rest of the season, for however long it actually is, being in the same kind of disheveled doll. But we'll get to that. So, and I hope that I've kind of covered most of this episode so far. I think I covered most of the hospital stuff, and I'm trying to think if there's anything that I left out. Junior, at one point when he was going to go and get that tube put in through his camera put through his throat, he ended up weirdly seeing like the Chucky doll going back and forth through the hallway, which is kind of weird because Chucky wasn't in the hospital during this point in time. But maybe Junior is to remember something. Maybe Junior was to have witnessed something, and he's just remembering this now while he was weirdly drugged. Not quite sure. We'll have to figure out what that meant with possibly the next episode. So Lexi and Jake make their way back to Lexi's home, and of course there's to be like caution tape, do not enter, and so on and so forth. But they end up, of course, kind of scooting through that and make their way into the home. So we still have it to where Lexi is to still complain about how Jake is still this sadistic, crazed man. And like, how could this have gotten that far, where Jake is wanting to send a doll to kill Lexi, and Lexi is just like, well, you dressed up as my dad for Halloween, and Lexi is still not seeing how like that could have really mentally scarred somebody. Like, she's really just like, I don't get her mind. Where like eventually it just seems like there was going to be like a tit for tat kind of thing, and eventually like Lexi doesn't realize that she had gone too far, or even when she is to have gone too far, she ended up apologizing, but she still doesn't realize still that even with that apology, she kind of eventually like backtracked on it, and eventually still made Jake feel like garbage. And so I don't get how Lexi doesn't see. She's oblivious. She's just oblivious, like her parents are. Because if anything, like her parents like are deflectors, like Lexi is a deflector. So like she is just going to deflect and just say that it's all Jake's fault 100%. Even though there should be some kind of split here, it's just not the case. So Jake and Lexi go and get some kind of weapon, thinking they're going to meet Chucky here. Wouldn't they have kind of done that before they got in the house? That's just me. Like, it kind of comes to like a late entry where they're eventually like, yeah, I guess we should grab a weapon, because like, what are we gonna do when eventually this doll springs out of nowhere? Like, I guess we didn't think of that until like halfway through the house. So they eventually go on and make this up the stairs. Luckily, I guess none of the stairs broke, right? That would have sucked, to have them like fall through the stairs or whichever. So they make it through the top of the stairs, and so again, we still have this disagreement between the two of Lexi and Jake. And so Jake just gets so frustrated with Lexi that eventually he like is to push her off this balcony that was attached to the stairwell. And so Lexi is like hanging on, and like, wouldn't have Lexi just said, like, oh my god, Jake was going to murder me? Like, there is no safe way out of here. Like, Lexi could be using this whole, like, she fell over this balcony as, like, Jake is a murderer, and I can't trust him. So that should have been the whole thing right there, to just have it to be Lexi is not going to trust Jake, because she's now going to hold the whole, like, her dangling as an excuse to eventually just throw back at Jake. But Jake is eventually to be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize what I was doing." Like he just pushed her because like he was to tell her that like she doesn't see the wrong that she has been doing. Like she doesn't see it at all. So he just pushed her, and so eventually she fell. He grabbed her, and so Chucky is now be at the like right underneath Lexi, and Chucky seems to have like half of his face just kind of melted or burnt off because most of this doll is probably made out of wax, right? I don't know, puppeteers, let me know in the comments below what Chucky's made out of. CGI? Okay. CGI and Lucky Charms? Alright. So, Chucky is telling Jake that all that he has to do is just let go. So this is kind of like Brad Pitt in like Fight Club, where Brad Pitt is telling Edward Norton to let go of the wheel and just let them eventually crash, which they do. So Chucky is telling Jake, "Let go. Just hey, it's an easy thing," and so Jake is just like, "Well, I'm sorry, Chucky. I'm not like you, and I can't do this." And so Chucky's like, "Well, fine. Like, I'll do the heavy lifting again." So Chucky starts trying to jump up and trying to stab Lexi in the foot, I guess. Which what good is that gonna do? Maybe she might bleed out through the foot. We don't know. Maybe he can luckily stab her in the calf or something, and she might bleed out that way. Who knows? But so eventually, Jake has the hugely muscular strength to hold this woman, and like he's holding her by one arm, he's consistently holding her, and I'm just like, man, wouldn't like she have just fell at this point? Because I'm like, how long can you really hold this person for? Like there's got to be some really good grip strength coming between these characters for whatever reason. But again, life is technically in the balance, but still, like how long do you really expect these people to be holding one another? Plus, there's, I'm sure, wires and stuff being attached to certain people, let's just say. But, anyways, so Jake goes and pulls up Lexi, and so now, reasonably, when Lexi and Jake get back up to safety, all of a sudden we have a security guard that ends up kind of walking his way into the house, and Chucky is to sit back down and act like a doll again. So the security guard is like, "Hey, what are you guys doing here?" And Lexi's like, "Well, this is my house." And he's like, "No, like this house is kind of like burnt down right now, so like this is technically not your house." So the security guard takes both Jake and Lexi and puts them in the back of this car. So the security guard went back into this house because Caroline had wanted Chucky. It's like, well, you're gonna get a different kind of Chucky, that's for sure. So the security guard goes off in the hospital to go deliver Chucky while Lexi and Jake are still in the vehicle, and eventually they get out of the vehicle to eventually make their way into the hospital to see what is to happen in the hospital. Which, here's the thing. Lexi actually in the next episode could give Jake an alibi for this murder. Because I'm sure Detective Evans is like, "Hey Jake, why are you murdering?" Why did you murder this security guard? Because no one else was to have seen this guy get murdered, and so it obviously has to be you now. Again, even though Lexi had to have been with you the whole time. So it'll be interesting to see what Lexi might have told Detective Evans. Like, is she going to tell her the truth? Is she just going to say like, "Oh no, I wasn't with Jake the whole time"? No. So, this detective or this security guy, I don't know, like he seems to have civilian clothes on, so I don't know what his real thing is here. I don't know what his qualifications really are. So we have this guy come and grab this doll, and he's consistently going and like going through this vending machine and trying to get this vending machine to work. And he ends up going into Caroline's room and is just stealing all of this food and like eating all these donuts. I'm like, man, all this guy cares about, I guess, is eating. So we have this security guy, whatever guy. That I'm going to say he's a cop. Let's say that to just kind of just easily have to not question this consistently. So this cop is eating donuts right over Chucky's face. So Chucky eventually, while this guy's back is turned, he grabs a scalpel, chucks it, and it hits into the cop's backside, and so he ends up falling back onto his back, which shoves the scalpel even further into this guy's body, where it all of a sudden paralyzes him. And so this guy's like, "Oh my god, like what's happening?" Like, so if this guy has the ability of talking, you would think he would have been able to also have the ability to yell, scream while he's getting murdered. I would have thought that, right? But I guess not. So Chucky eventually goes and is to just be like, well, hey man, like, I was getting so tired of you. So, like, you're gonna just die now. So Chucky just starts grabbing these needles and poking this guy and torturing him. And then so Chucky ends up getting 2 stacks of needles and just starts poking this guy so heavily that eventually, I guess, he ends up dying from all of the blood loss. So eventually Chucky has to go back to where he was. The nurses come in and eventually find the dead body. And so Jake and Lexi rush in to eventually find out that there's a dead body there, to all of a sudden have Chucky give, of course, Jake and Lexi the middle finger to be like, haha, like, I killed another person, and like, F you, because I'm going to come after you next. So with that said, let's call this episode a wrap, because I want to get out of here as quickly as possible. Really good episode, really enjoyed it. Eventually we'll see how next week plays out, but I want to get out of here so I can get this done as quickly as possible, because it seems people like a 30-minute wrap up of this whole thing. There might have been something that I might have forgot about here or there, but otherwise I hope that I covered most of this episode. So there might have been something with Detective Evans that I might have forgot about, because it seems like she's, honestly, there's parts about her that just makes her kind of a forgettable character. I think I know eventually Detective Evans did go to Devin and tell him that, hey, like, Oliver stabbed. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but I'm going to tell you this anyways. And then eventually Detective Evans tells Logan and the Cross family that, hey, I'm going to need your kids because Logan had been stabbed. And like, here's the thing. They didn't question Junior. I guess they're probably going to question him later because technically he's out because of the whole throat thing. But still, Detective Evans could have like questioned anybody that was actually at this party. But instead, like, Detective Evans immediately questions Jake, and that's pretty much it. So considering Jake seems to have more motive, or seems to have more of a pattern thing than anyone else, no one else is going to get questioned. Like, they could have immediately just said, well, Lexi had been like dancing with Oliver all night. Maybe there was a lover's quarrel that ended up happening. Maybe Junior ended up stabbing this guy in the back. We don't know. Like, they could have curved this story in a number of ways, besides it immediately going with Jake. Maybe there was a reason why Lexi did all that she did in this episode. Maybe they could pin all of this on Lexi and no one else, but instead they go back to the same well with Jake. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.